All right, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you back. The conversation for a great deal of this week has been Adrian Peterson and, of course, the NFL, but Peterson in particular. He was benched last Sunday, then he was reactivated, then shortly thereafter he was deactivated and will not be playing tomorrow and for the foreseeable future until his case is adjudicated. He will be paid. And, of course, the debate rages on. There are many people that are defending what Adrian Peterson did in disciplining his 4-year-old son in Texas. And even his mother, as I mentioned earlier today, recently came out and defended her son in what he did against what is her grandson. Joining us now is award-winning author of Promises Kept, Raising Black Boys to Succeed in School and in Life, Hilary Beard. There's the book right there on the screen. Hello, Hilary.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Great to talk to you. All right, so you say that we should not rush to judge Adrian Peterson and parents who use what they call a switch, which I had never heard of until this incident, those who use that to discipline their kids.
Yeah. So let me say first that I do not condone child abuse. It looks as though we went over the line in this case. And I do not practice physical discipline because I'm an auntie, not a parent. So that's the caveat, right?
Okay.
But I interviewed a number of experts ranging from pediatricians and a psychiatrist who said that the standards, even for those professionals who are required to report, vary and are subjective. So in this particular case, we know that parenting practices, including the use of punishment, have evolved over time. More affluent people, typically people with resources to do things like get babysitters and nannies, and the privileged, shifted away from corporal punishment first, right? In many areas, many people do what their parents did automatically, though, without introspection, and corporal punishment can be one of those areas where parents react reflexively. So the standards for corporal punishment and physical discipline differ by community. And in this case, there are many communities here. There's community in Texas where he actually disciplined this child. The child then flew to Minnesota. There's the community of the doctor, who we would assume would be affluent. I know nothing about the mother. We have the community of the many communities of the media, many communities of the general public. And it may tell us something about Texas standards for corporal punishment that the first grand jury that this information was brought in front of did not indict him.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. And the standard is the community standards. What is viewed to have gone over the line, or what is considered too much or abusive by community standards, and it would vary from community to community. So you make excellent points there. But I guess and you did add the caveat also that you think he probably went too far. I don't think there are too many people out there, at least not that I've heard from, that really believe he's a bad person and meant to leave scars or hurt or harm his child. I think most people, even if they disagree with how far he went, think that because of the way he was raised and what he's told us and what his mother has told us, that he believes this is the best way to, as the title of your book talks about, and your book talks about specifically, it's the best way to raise his son, a black son, to succeed in life.
Yeah. And the reality is that almost all parents have physically disciplined their children. And you might be surprised to know that 94% of the parents of 3- and 4-year-olds have spanked their children, right? Now, this is not a spanking, obviously. It's a whipping. And for some people, it's extremely offensive, although it may be common in that culture. But the parents of boys, the parents of black children, Southerners, evangelical Christians, the poor, the less educated, there are many communities that are more likely to spank. And so Peterson's identity intersects with several of those factors. We also know that Texas justice includes allowing adults to hit children in school. It's one of the most permissive states in terms of allowing adults to hit children in schools. We also know that the East Texas community where Peterson grew up, in that community, cotton was once king. And if you go on the website of the Texas Library and State Archives, it will tell you that in that part of the state, physical discipline through whipping was common and acceptable during slavery. and 70% of slaves were whipped. So I would imagine that a lot of people might say that not much has changed in some parts of East Texas
Well, let me,
slavery, Jim Crow.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Let me ask you about this notion, which you referred to in your piece at theroot.com, which is some experts trace African American reliance upon corporal punishment as a vestige of slavery.
Yes.
Does that make sense to you? Because I don't understand how that could be. I mean, passed down from family to family to family all the way back from slavery?
Yeah, I mean, we have many practices, parenting practices that are passed down reflexively. So a common one, I'm a health writer, a common one is people's dietary practices. Many people eat unhealthy diets because that's what their parents fed them, right? And so a lot of parenting behaviors, a lot of behaviors in general, just reflexive. We do what our parents did, right? And so for people who are not in the Black community, slavery and Jim Crow seems a very long time ago, but my father was born and raised during Jim Crow segregation, and during Jim Crow even, lynchings were common. So I believe the last lynching in the United States was actually in 1989. So parents who were, so originally during slavery, whippings were used to control and defeat people. Sometimes Black people who were enslaved had to whip each other for the slave master. During Reconstruction and Jim Crow, the children the Black boys in particular, who were the most successful, were the ones who abided by certain boundaries. For instance, not going in certain neighborhoods, not looking at certain people certain ways, particularly not looking at white women. If you did those things and other things, you might end up lynched, right? So oftentimes Black parents severely discipline their children to teach them that control. They would rather beat their own child or whip their own child. In this case, we're talking about with a twig, right? I've never had it, I've never seen it, but they would maybe beat or whip their own child to instill that kind of control so the child would not step over a boundary in society that would cause him to end up dead. And so until very recently, certainly spanking as a corporal punishment, and authoritarian style discipline, what white people might consider authoritarian style parenting and discipline, produced the most successful Black boys in American society. We're shifting now, and in this particular case, you're seeing through the media a practice that hasn't shifted as quickly, but the people who shifted first and the people who shifted the most have been affluent people, and a generation.
The fatherless problem in the Black community. I mean, do you buy into, being the author that you are and the expert that you are, do you buy into in general the disciplining, the hitting, the spanking, you know, of Black children? Do you think that they will turn out better if they're disciplined in that manner, in general? And we only have a minute. Maybe it's not fair, but go ahead.
Yeah, let me tell you what the research says. The research on Black children says that Black children who live in authoritative households with high expectations and a lot of warmth, who are spanked occasionally, actually in predominantly Black communities where spanking is a norm, actually do better.
Right.
When they're outside of those communities, it's looked at as a bad parenting practice.
All right. Hilary, very interesting. I hope you'll come back. I appreciate you coming on. Very interesting conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Hilary Beard, ladies and gentlemen. All right, and we'll be back with Gimme 5 after the break. But first, we have come a long way since the Wright brothers. They first took flight back in 1903. In just over 100 years, we've gone from barely getting off the ground to making it all the way to the moon and beyond. So let's take a look back now at the history of flight. I said the history of flight, from the Wright brothers to the first moon landing. It's all next, if you keep it where it is, on Newsmax Television.
Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic.
Here she is, safe and sound, having just completed the first flight by a woman across the Atlantic.
Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? We choose to go to the moon.
and I will ride into the fire.
That's one small step for man.
Rise above the flames.
One giant leap for
I will
man.
climb like a phoenix and rise.
The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger slipped the surly bonds of Earth to touch the face of God.
Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
We've only just begun. We're still pioneers.